Okay, so this is not a video I expected to make today. However, this morning on the Bleach subreddit, I saw that somebody had posted an answer from Kubo himself from the club outside Q&A that he's involved in regarding a question that has frankly bothered Bleach fans since the end of the manga and was then exacerbated by the Hell chapter that was released in August of last year. To put it bluntly, the question is a simple one. What is the true nature of Ichigo's zanpakuto Zangetsu at the end of the series? Because it really seems to be a little bit up in the air. Now, Kubo has used this forum in the past to answer several lingering questions that fans have had, and we've even talked about one of them here on the channel before, specifically the one where he was talking about Yachiru, her true nature, and her connection to Nozarashi. However, this Ichigo one is decidedly even more complicated, and certainly one that fans have been waiting for some clarification on for some time now. And so, due to the complexity of the subject at hand and the fact that the question and answer have been through at least 2 different translations, the purpose of this video is really just to offer you my best interpretation of what's actually going on here. I'm not claiming these to be absolute concrete confirmed facts or anything like that, as I'm reading the same translations as everybody else, but hopefully I can try and do my best to shine some light on this situation. Before we get started, however, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now, as you're in the perfect place for Bleach content like this every single week. And if you want to support me a little bit further, you want to show the video some love by giving it a thumbs up, that would be absolutely amazing. It really does help increase the reach of the video, gets it more exposure on the old YouTube algorithm, and just means that more Bleach fans like yourselves get a chance to see it. And if you want to take that support from me another step further, we have a Patreon for the channel as well, where you can get videos early, and you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. An enormous thank you goes out, a massive shout out to everybody who is supporting me over there at the moment. All these names on the screen, I really appreciate you allowing me to do what I love, which in this instance is trying to answer really kind of vague concepts like this one, so thank you. So, I think there's a couple of ways to approach this, and I think firstly it's important for us to have some context around the nature of Ichigo's zanpakuto. So we'll look at this from the lens of the 1,000-Year Blood War. Early on in the arc, his Bankai Tensor Zangetsu is destroyed by Ugram Hashwolf, leaving Ichigo effectively hopeless and with the zanpakuto in dire need of reforging. So he goes to the royal palace to get his zanpakuto remade. However, upon arriving there, Ichigo finds that he is unable to defeat the Asauchi because he is currently not a true Shinigami. He doesn't know his true nature, his roots, where his power comes from, and without that clear understanding, he will never be able to create, essentially, a true zanpakuto. So Ichigo goes back home, he speaks to Isshin, and he learns the truth about his parents, his heritage, and all that sort of thing. And then he returns to the royal palace, where Oetsu now discovers that Ichigo has a newfound understanding of who he really is. He knows who he is on the inside, he knows the components that make up his abilities. And the Asauchi now bow to him, and he's able to choose one to make a new zanpakuto out of a true Zangetsu. And as you know, because Ichigo's Shinigami powers are intrinsically linked to his hollow powers, they are effectively one and the same, his Asauchi bears a hollow mask, much in the same way as Ichigo himself was wearing one when he exited the Shattered Shaft at the start of the series, because they have always been one and the same. And so Oetsu, with all of this in mind, proceeds to forge him a brand new zanpakuto, and now Ichigo dual wields 2 blades, a massive elongated blade that looks kind of similar to the one he had before, and a much smaller, almost knife-like blade now representing the Quincy powers that he also wields. And so these 2 blades are the true form of Ichigo's Zangetsu, one that incorporates everything that makes him who he is. On the one hand, white, who symbolises his fusion of Shinigami and hollow powers, and on the other, who we previously knew as Old Man Zangetsu, his Quincy powers. So this is all well and good so far, and Ichigo dual wields these weapons right up until the final battle of the arc against Yhwach himself, and he goes and activates Bankai. By doing so, he effectively fuses his 2 blades together, placing the much smaller blade into the bigger blade, creating a brand new sword, which essentially looks like a massive version of his original Shikai, now encased in a white outer shell. And again, this is, for the most part, so far, so good. All Ichigo has done is taken his two blades, put them together, and created one brand new special sword, a new Tensei Zangetsu, and he's now fighting Yhwach. At the very end of the battle, however, Yhwach smashes the white outer casing of Ichigo's Bankai to reveal his old Shikai. Well, it's a little bit strange, but Ichigo cuts Yhwach with what I always assumed, anyway, was a representation of his pure Shinigami powers, especially since by this point, Yhwach supposedly has robbed him of at least his Quincy powers as well. What makes this confusing, however, and where this initial question that's being asked stems from, is the fact that Ichigo's sword doesn't appear to revert back to the dual blades of his Shikai. The next time we see him in the canon manga, the Hell chapter, he is still wielding one elongated blade, which now resembles his old Shikai, which also appears to be his new Bankai. It's definitely a little confusing, and this was also again exacerbated by Bleach Brave Souls releasing an epilogue version of the character, where again he just seemed to be wielding one single blade. So yeah, things are a little confusing. Why does Ichigo no longer have seemingly two swords anymore? What even became of that? And what really was his Bankai in the end of the series? I tried to answer that in a previous video, but there seems to be more coming out all the time. So now let's take a look at the question that was posed to Kubo himself. Now, the Google Translate version is a little bit dodgy, so I'm using a version provided on Reddit by somebody called Zaza BGFD, I think that's right. Thank you very much for that. It does make the situation a little bit clearer. So the person posing this question to Kubo basically reiterated what I just recapped for you there. He says that Bleach Brave Souls released a brand new version of an epilogue version of Ichigo where he seems to be wielding a single blade version of Zangetsu that resembles his old Shikai. The person asking this question says that this blade seems to resemble the exact same one that emerged during Ichigo's final strike against Yhwach. But the person asking the question theorizes that when Ichigo returned to Shikai, his two blades should have come back, however that doesn't appear to be the case. So what's the reasoning behind this? The person asking speculates that it could be a couple of things. Maybe it's because Brave Souls' version of the character is just made up for the game, and therefore isn't canon, or is it because Ichigo's reforged blades were supposed to represent Hollow and Shinigami powers, but those powers were supposedly stolen by Yhwach, so is that why the sword didn't revert back? However, we know, thanks to Can't Fear Your Own World, that Ichigo got his powers back, plus there's also something else we'll get into a little bit later as well, which seems to contradict this. So basically, to kind of cut to the very center of this, why does Ichigo have only one sword, and why does it resemble the sword of his Bankai at the end of the series? Now, unfortunately, Kubo says that he will answer the question, but he doesn't intend to return to this topic, which is a little frustrating because we do still have questions. However, this is essentially what Kubo says. So, essentially, in the same way that all zanpakuto must stem from an asauchi, all zanpakuto must have two components that make up their correct shape: a sword and a sheath. The only zanpakuto in the known existence to not have this are Ichigo's Zangetsu and Oetsu's Sayafushi. This makes sense. Of course, Oetsu's one, we absolutely already knew that. It's the blade he wields against the Schutzstoffel. The blade is so sharp that a sheath literally cannot be made for it, and so instead it must be carried around in basically this enormous vat of a jelly-like substance. That one, fair enough. And actually, Ichigo's makes sense as well when you think about it. When you kind of think back through the series, the entire time Ichigo wasn't wielding his true Zangetsu, he never had a sheath. Instead, he simply wrapped the blade in bandages. So, fair enough. His zanpakuto was not complete, it was not true, and he didn't have the correct shape, as it's called. And in fact, once Ichigo's blade has been reformed into 2 swords in the Thousand Year Blood War, he does start sheathing it. We see in one chapter where he's about to leave the Zero Division, he now seems to have sheaths for both of his blades, and later on when he draws one of them, the large one off of his back against Yuha bark, he actively smashes that sheath to pieces. However, Kubo goes a little further than that as well, and he says that once reforged by Oetsu into 2 blades, Ichigo's zanpakuto gains a sheath, and that sheath takes the form of the much smaller Quincy blade. So now you have a Zangetsu that has its correct shape. It has the long sword that is the hollow and Shinigami powers, and then the much smaller Quincy sword, which is acting as the sheath of the zanpakuto, presumably the fact that Ichigo's sword and sheath are literally 2 blades is down to Ichigo's immense power, or his dual nature, or maybe a combination of both, but he now critically has a sword and a sheath. It's just that they happen to be 2 blades. However, the fact that Zangetsu's true shape is 2 blades implies that they should fit together, much like a sword and a sheath actually do. And this is exactly what happens when Ichigo activates Bankai. So when Ichigo activates Bankai, the now true Zangetsu is being sheathed by the Quincy sword. The sheath is that outer white casing which is made up by his Quincy powers, and what lies within is the true form of his Bankai, the actual form of his hollow and Shinigami powers. During that final climactic moment, Yuha bark attacks Ichigo and succeeds in destroying the sheath, the white outer casing crumbling and turning to dust. But instead of destroying the blade itself, it simply unsheaths Ichigo's hollow and Shinigami powers, the new true Tensei Zangetsu. At least in that moment then, with the sheath being annihilated, it seems like the small Quincy sword has probably been completely destroyed. However, Kubo mentions that Ichigo during that moment reabsorbs the pieces of that Quincy sheath, which again makes a lot of sense. You know, his blade has been destroyed, but he can reform it himself with his Reiatsu. That Quincy part of himself has just simply returned to his body in that moment. And, you know, for the most part, that's effectively it, apparently. Ichigo never had a true zanpakuto. We know this because it was never born from an Osauchi. But now that's being taken even further. It never had the correct shape either because it wasn't in 2 parts. It didn't have those 2 essential components that make up a zanpakuto, a sword and a sheath. And again, we know this because he only ever wrapped his blade in bandages. Now though, thanks to Oetsu, his sword was reforged into one representing basically every facet of his power. The massive blade represents the hollow and Shinigami powers, and also the sword half of Zangetsu, and the smaller blade is his Quincy, and the sheath of Zangetsu as well. By activating Bankai, he effectively sheaths his zanpakuto, fusing the 2 of them together, and now the Bankai is sheathed in that white outer casing of the Quincy scabbard. And Yuha bark destroys the sheath during the final battle and is then killed by the true Zangetsu, fulfilling the prophetic vision that Yugrum sent him just before he was killed, basically showing Yuha bark that he would be killed by a sword resembling Ichigo's old Shikai, which apparently turns out to be his true Bankai. And now, because Ichigo reabsorbed the smashed Quincy sheath during that final fight, he can now essentially choose to showcase his power, to form his power, however he would like, and apparently he can return to the dual blades if he chooses, or he can simply combine them into one sword, which is apparently what we are currently seeing him with. Phew, so, I mean, that's really the best I can do, I think, and it is a little bit confusing. There's no getting around it, and I kind of wish Kubo had opted for a simpler option. However, there is some nice symbolism here as well. Old Man Zangetsu, upon being revealed to be Ichigo's Quincy powers, basically notes that he was always kind of hindering Ichigo, holding him back, basically keeping a lid on Ichigo's hollow and Shinigami true powers, and that seems to be essentially what the true version of Tensei Zangetsu is all about as well. It's the idea of the Quincy form is sheathing Ichigo's true powers, keeping a lid on them until it's destroyed and Ichigo can then kill Yuha bark. But unfortunately, it's never quite that clear cut, and I do still have some questions about this as well. Firstly, how is this new blade that Ichigo is wielding in the Hell chapter different from his Bankai state? Because it looks effectively exactly the same, just minus the cloth. And it's kind of weird because Ichigo's supposed true Tensor Zangetsu is unsheathed by Yhwach in their final clash, and I don't really understand that because it does look almost identical to the blade Ichigo is currently wielding now in the Hell chapter. To me, that seems really strange. What Ichigo uses to finish off Yhwach appears to be the exact same blade he has now, which is effectively the question brought up by the person on the club Q&A. So I've been trying to wrap my head around this, and I'm not entirely sure. Could it be that Ichigo is still in Bankai in the Hell chapter? That feels very unlikely to me. So I'm kind of wondering if maybe the sword we see him with there is his new sealed zanpakuto, and then were he to activate Shikai, he would bring out the dual blades again, and then if he activates Bankai after that, they would be sheathed again and turn into the sword we see him use against Yhwach that was destroyed by Yhwach. I wonder if it is as simple as that. Maybe it's meant to be like a cyclical thing. Ichigo's new base sword eventually gets to that Bankai where the sheath is smashed and it looks like his base sword again, and it kind of goes round in a circle. I'm not entirely sure, to be completely honest with you. It's definitely hurting my brain a little bit, I won't lie. I'm not really sure why they look exactly the same. And if anyone can enlighten me in the comments, I would absolutely love to hear what you have to say. It could even just be that the difference between base Zanpakuto and Bankai Zangetsu is that the base one has a cloth on the hilt, although I seriously doubt it's just that. And then so the other big question I have is, how did Ichigo have that Quincy sheath around his Bankai? That sheath, that white casing, supposedly represents his Quincy powers in that final moment, but how can it be there if Yhwach supposedly stole them from him? If the Quincy King already robbed him of his powers prior to that, then why does he have it? So I'm kind of, again, racking my brain on this one as well, and I'm thinking, could it be that when his sword was fixed by Tsukishima, Tsukishima's Book of the End also helped to restore Ichigo's stolen powers, which would imply that Ichigo actually finishes off the big bad with all of his powers intact. And I guess that does make sense, and actually I kind of like that. I kind of wish, though, that if that was the case, Kubo would have just written that in the manga. But so it is a little confusing. Maybe the reason he has the Quincy sheath is because Tsukishima was able to restore his powers along with his blade. But again, I'm not entirely sure. And there's going to be a lot of discussion around this. So if you guys have theories and thoughts and you can enlighten me at all, please do let me know in the comments. I would love to hear what you think about these questions. I do think this is a step forward, but there's still so much to be revealed, I think. Those are the big questions I have then, leaving this video. What is the difference here between Ichigo's seemingly new base Zanpakuto and his Bankai form, and how does he seemingly have his Quincy sheath despite having his Quincy powers stolen from him? So for now, guys, that is about the best I can do. I've really tried to break this down for you, and I hope it was at least helpful a little bit. Let's finish this off with just a real quick breakdown of what I think is going on here. Ichigo never had a true Zanpakuto. It was never born from an Asauchi, and also never had a sheath, therefore it never had a correct shape. Fair enough. Once he goes to Oetsu and learns the truth about his heritage, Oetsu reforges him a brand new sword that now takes into account everything that makes Ichigo who he is. He now has two blades, a sword to reflect the Hollow and Shinigami side, and a much smaller sword to reflect the Quincy side. However, these two swords also reflect something else, the two essential components of a Zanpakuto, the sword and the sheath. When he activates Bankai, Ichigo essentially just sheaths his sword, and he fuses the two together in a natural way that creates what we see here with Tensa Zangetsu. And so what we see here with this version of Tensa is his Hollow and Shinigami powers sheathed by his Quincy powers. That sheath is then broken by Yuha Bark, revealing and unsheathing his true Tensa Zangetsu. Despite the fact that Ichigo's sheath was destroyed in that battle, he reabsorbed it and now essentially has free reign on how he chooses to depict his powers, whether that's as two swords or combined into one seemingly new base zanpakuto. Yeah, there's no getting around it. We're going to be scratching our heads about this, I think, for a little while, but it does go some way to offering a bit of clarity. I think knowing the idea of swords and sheaths as essential components of a zanpakuto is nice and a bit enlightening. So I appreciate finding that out, but I would just love for Kubo to draw out exactly what's going on here. It would really help us out, I think, if we saw Ichigo maybe go into Shikai, or if he's already in Shikai, go into Bankai, or maybe he's already into Bankai. I've got no idea. But it would be amazing to find out what's actually happening here. I guess to leave you with my personal guess, I just think that the new version of Zangetsu that we can see in the Hell chapter is currently his base Zanpakuto. Alright guys, I really hope that helped. Of course, this is probably going to generate some discussion, so please let me know in the comments what you think about my theories, my interpretation, and also my questions as well about what is going on here. Am I on the mark? Am I way off the mark? Please do let me know. I always love learning new things from you guys in the comments as well. This is a two-way street, so please do enlighten me. I would really appreciate it. Alright guys, but remember, as I said, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now. And until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.